Episode of Cello Chat is brought to you by Carriage House Violins of Johnson String Instrument. Please visit us at www.carriagehouseviolins.com.
Okay, and we're live.
All right. All right. Hello, everybody. I feel like I'm back at a lockdown, speaking to a camera. Good. All right. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Han Bin Yoon. I'm a cellist, evidently. So a little bit about me. Korean-American cellist, currently based in Belgium since 2014, so it's 8-something years now. I currently am teaching at the Royal Conservatory of Brussels here in Belgium, as well as directing the Belgium Cello Society. So I do a little bit of everything. So I agreed to do this live stream a long time ago, but because life got so busy, it wasn't until about a week ago that I was really able to sit down and think of a topic for all of you, a topic that I hope to find which would help many of you, hopefully, going through this chaotic 21st century world. And I wanted to talk today about the importance of being balanced, not only as a cellist, but also as a person living through this post-pandemic world. Let's see. 1 second, let me just move this along. So, I chose this topic because in the context of what I do, I have to actually make a very conscious effort to maintain a healthy mental and physical balance, or else I'm pretty sure I would have had a burnout a long time ago. So, let's talk a little bit about what balance means for me, but also as a general term. In the broadest sense, I had to think about this a little bit in the context of today's session. It's the awareness of oneself in the present moment, but also simultaneously in the past and the future. I know it sounds like a lot of words, but hopefully this will all make sense by the end of the session. So, for example, if someone were to tell my college self, so obviously in the past, what would I have, in the past, what would probably not have paid much attention to is the importance of balance or the relevance of it for my life, because I was probably young and naive, and I thought I was invincible physically and mentally, but that is definitely not the case. And now looking back at that moment from today's point of view, I sometimes wish I had known some of the things that I know now back then. And taking the lessons that I've learned back then and also things that I learn every day, I'm then better equipped to continue forward in my life, both as a cellist and as just a human being, really. So, this image of balance, you have the fulcrum right in the center, and then you have that, I would say, the present, and then you have the two weights of the past and the future that kind of dance around this present fulcrum, yeah? So as life is often unpredictable, that balance might, get skewed. Sometimes it might be, too much in the past and you can't really move forward, or you're only thinking about the future and you actually don't really, understand what you have to do in the present moment. So if you have this image in mind, you'll have a good self-awareness and you'll find your way back, hopefully. Yeah? So I wanted to separate today's talk in two parts, obviously. We are on Cello Bello at the end of the day, and I want to talk about how balance plays into the cellistic side, but then also the second half I also will talk about how it factors into the career side, the everyday, day-to-day side of my life. Yeah. So When it comes to sound production and the use of the bow, that's where a lot of the issue of balance comes in. And that's one of the things I focus a lot in my lessons, which is sound quality. And especially when it concerns sound projection, not necessarily projection in this space, but also projection when our teachers often told us, imagine you were playing this in a 2,000 seat hall, would this work? And when we talk about this, of course, the first instinct is to press, but as we all know, that only produces a very strained sound, and it ultimately actually won't project very well when you compare it to a nice balanced and full sound. And of course, you have sound qualities that are appropriate for a different musical context. So one, balanced sound might not be the right one for another musical context, because life is not black and white. Music is also not black and white, mostly. But to talk about this in terms of cello playing, it really comes down to 3 different axes. And the important things are the contact point, the weight, and the speed. And so at this point, I always like to say that it's like cooking. You adjust these 3 principal ingredients, and then you create the most delicious dish. I know it's a little cheesy, but it does make sense. And I love cooking, I love eating, so it's a very apt parallel for me. So anyway, let's talk about this in the interpretation of the first movement of Dvorak. Yeah. So we have our famous theme. For the sake of this scientific experiment, I'm going to play the opening theme in 3 different contact points, but the other 2 axes that I mentioned, so the weight and the speed, I'm going to try to maintain it exactly the same on the 3 different contact points. I'm sure many of you already know what's going to happen, but for those of you who don't, hopefully the sound quality here will do this exercise justice. So the first contact point I will choose, I think you can see clearly, somewhere around here. The second one somewhere around here, and the third one around here. So going further and further down the string. So same speed and same weight here, but 3 different contact points, yes? So let's try. I think I kept it mostly there. Second exercise. I'm trying to look at the screen, which is a bit far, but I think I succeeded there. And then the third exercise. Hopefully the different sound qualities were heard. So it's very clear that the weight and the speed should have been adapted to our choice of the contact point. And I think for my taste and in this room that I'm in, it should have somewhere been between the second and third exercise, I think, to create the interpretation that I generally like in this opening thing. Moving on. Now, as I said, combining the different levels of these 3 different axes, then we can arrive at different nuanced interpretations of this theme, right? So, of course, the danger in this theme is that, you want to project, you want to create this character, and then you start pressing because you start feeling, am I really portraying this? Am I really feeling this whole? But then we can start remedying that problem by concentrating on the balance, and I like to specify the balance at the upper half of the bow. So what I often hear is a really nice healthy start at the beginning of the bow, all the way up to usually around here, and then what happens is from here onwards, depending on the context, if it's an expressive, extroverted a theme like this, we start pressing because obviously here it's a weaker part of the bow, and we think this is going to help. Yeah, but it's actually not the case. And then the second example is when we get to the half point and then we start completely losing engagement or what I call intention in the bow. But that's for I'll do another example or an excerpt to show that part. But for the first one, the issue of pressing. So usually what happens is we have, and then by the time we get here, we start. Notice that actually what I've done with the arm is start pressing rather than using the balance that exists naturally here in the bow, yeah? So I'll do, and in the middle part around here, I maintain the three axes as it is and I let the bow be. I don't try to manipulate too much. I am well aware within my body and the balance of letting that bow maintain it, not to change it too dramatically, or else that's when we start hearing the dip or the pression in the bow. So yeah, and then you see I had to move a little bit, also balance between my 2 feet here and the body to actually help the bow to not press, especially here. Yeah. So now if I also want to talk about how this, sorry, 1 second. How this bow can actually have more nuances even within one note. And it is possible, and that's actually where I think a lot of the magic in music happens, is the nuances and the colors that can change, but intentionally, not because I want press or that I lose the intention in the bow, but that I want it to change a certain way. So like, for example, this first B in the Dvorak, I could interpret it 2 different ways. One that is, very strong and, rather, what's the right word, heavy and static, and the other one that actually wants to move forward. If I actually just try the first way, okay, I could say in different halls this would have been a beautiful sound. For me it's a little bit pressed, but let's talk about the ultimate goal, which is performing it with the orchestra, with a big hall. For me that's not enough though. What I find more interesting is when I can start a note and then actually with the engagement and the balance of the 3 different axes that I mentioned, I find a way to nuance it so that the note actually is more alive, it has more movement. And to do that I start, and then I maybe save and the bow becomes maybe slightly slower in the middle. And then close to the middle of the bow, I actually start moving at a faster speed without being too funny business about, the weight or the contact point. So I do this. Instead of, notice that the sound dies. It's quite static. Maybe, there are people who like that interpretation. Totally fine for them. For me, that's not what I have in mind. So I try to find a way to balance that bow and let the bow do its thing rather than manipulate it, if that makes sense. So yeah. Notice that I went to the up bow, but I didn't press. I didn't do that. I found the balance and then I let it sing fully. Yes? Now another example, the second example that I mentioned about the upper half, is when people start losing, and this is actually maybe more of an issue for me when I hear cellists, is the upper half completely losing any intention or what I say engagement in the bow fingers. Yeah. So for example, we might have this at the let's say the second movement of the Brahms F major sonata. So we might have this lovely, beautiful, it might be the most gorgeous, beautiful second movement theme that we have in our repertoire, arguably, yes. But the trick here is that in the second half of the bow, I don't press, but I also maintain the beauty of tone by letting the bow do its thing, by staying balanced and maintaining what I've had found with the contact point, the weight, and the speed. So for example, so I have, notice that here I go, and then there, we have that little hairpin there. Da-dee, I use different speeds, different weights throughout that one bow, but I didn't force anything. I let the bow continue on its own path. And that's how we are able to create beautiful nuances in longer phrases, even in one note. And for me, that's really, really important in music, because that's where it's in the small nuances in between notes where the music really happens. Yeah. Good. Well, look, I think today's going to be a very general idea on it. And then if you have questions, make sure you note it so that we could talk about it at the end. But the next thing I want to talk about is how this all relates within the context of your 21st century cellistic career. Yes? So let's find balance in how I manage my administrative side of my life. The first thing that is very important for me is time management. I do have a mild case of OCD, and with all the varied sides to my life, as a cellist, teacher, director, I have to be extremely focused on managing my time very well. To do this, on a very practical level, I use my different calendars, and I use also, Google Suites or G Suites, or I think it's now called Google Workshop, to manage all of the different folders that I have, whether it's school related or Belgian Cello Society related, personally related, all the documents with subfolders with more subfolders. Everything is very meticulously labeled. For me, that's really important. Of course, also, I'm somewhat of a visual person too, so my calendar is very color coordinated as well. For example, if I have to bring up my calendar, I had this, so last October 2022, we had the third edition of the Brussels Cello Festival, and just to give you an idea, the color coding that happens on my calendar, it's really beautiful actually, I must say. But I don't know how many different calendars based on different maybe institutions or different work partners that I have. And then that helps me stay very focused, and also keeping myself in check as tasks come along. And I use Google Calendar actually to keep my tasks handy. So whatever you need to do to find some sort of organization for your time management, I espouse it very much. Another skill that I learned, I would say actually more recently, because until recent years I've been very hands-on, is delegating. When you arrive at this point in any project, this might be the hardest skill to learn. But with practice, things force you sometimes, and it's almost necessary to delegate the work. And for example, when I started the Brussels Cello Festival in 2018, when you start something from scratch, absolutely doesn't exist at all. It's just an idea in my head with a few friends and a few very helpful sponsors. You do everything from the ground up. So I remember literally doing the programming, what else was service negotiations, catering, communications, graphics, sponsor management, you name it. I did literally everything from A to Z. But after a certain point, I would say after this past edition in 2022, it became very apparent that certain things needed specialized care. And there's only so much that one person who, mind you, was not trained in arts management and was doing this purely based on my, self-awareness of what happens when I go to a festival and I play. There is a limit to that, and I've been learning, simultaneously, so that I can always make sure I know what's going on in the festival. But I'm at the point where now I really have to leave it to the professionals to do some of the work here. Yeah. Another important thing for keeping balance in your life on an administrative level is self-care. And I think we come from, training when we were younger, always practice, 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 keep every minute counts kind of situation. And I was really bad at that when I was younger. Self-care was not something in my mind. Every single minute that I was awake, and that was most of the day, and I slept very little. I'll come to that later. I yeah, I was always running from one thing to another, whether it was studying, taking tests, doing competitions, practicing for my next lesson with my teachers, whatever it was go, go, go. But you do need, even back then, I would say, it would have helped me if someone told me, Han Bin, go take a full day off, don't study, don't practice. It would have been nice if someone told me that. Well, actually, sorry, if someone told me that, I would have said, yeah, okay, and then I would have probably continued doing my things. So I'm not sure. But self-care is really important, and everybody's looks very different, I would say. Um, for example, some people might just take a week not doing any of the concerto or sonata repertoire. They might just say, I want to do 1 week of just scales and arpeggios. That is their self-care. Great, very commendable. Other people might be taking a week completely off. And I'm going to tell you, I've done that many times already. And for me, it's a combination of different things. You know, my self-care, not that any of you are interested, but I'll say it anyway. Eating really well, going to get many massages, having spa days, and keeping the cello locked up away for a week. Not even feeling guilty about keeping the cello away for a week. You know, I think, we're at the point, well, at least, everybody gets to a point, I think, where it's like riding a bicycle. You know what cello playing is about at a certain point, and actually taking some time off will really kind of settle certain things in your mind and invigorate you to continue looking for different things. And, it might feel rusty for a little bit, but it comes back very quickly. And actually, I really espouse taking those moments to re-energize yourself for self-care's purpose. Yeah. So that's important.
We have a question if you'd like to take a couple at the moment.
Sure. Yeah.
So we have one question from Paul Dandrin asking, can you talk about a body leaning left-right movement with bowing direction, such as a lean with the bow direction versus a lean against the bow direction? When do you do one way versus the other?
Sure. For example, when I showed you the opening of the Dvorak, my natural instinct was to lean left. And why is that? Well, as I'm drawing a down bow, if I lean left, in fact, it's helping me to find a natural kind of tension against the bow so that actually I don't need to press down, but the cello itself is also, I'm exaggerating, the cello doesn't do this, but the cello comes up forward as my bow goes to the upper half, and that allows it to continue singing. So as I go left, actually, I'm helping the bow not to have to press, but find that full, balanced, beautiful sound that we were looking for. When I would go to the right, that's a good question. Actually, when I do go to the right, I'm not sure if I do this because of this reason, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but it's to elongate the bow, in fact. So as I did that there, yes, I'm going to the right, and I might feel, this being said, I have to tell you guys, I might have felt a little bit imbalanced, but I'm trying to keep it within a nice general body balance here, so that as I go to the right, it makes it feel longer, and actually it will help you also find a nice contact point and the weight under the string, so that you can make that beautiful to let it keep going, because here in the second theme here, what we want it to sound like there's no bow. You want it to sound like it's continuing. So I don't know if that helps answer your question, but those are two different ways that I use the balance left and right of my feet and my body in relation to the balance in the bow. Yeah. If you have other follow-up question, feel free to ask William. Yeah.
Sure. We have another question from Milena asking, great to hear about your way of balancing life's responsibilities and your cello career's obligations. My question may be suitable for another Facebook Live session, but in case there is time, could you talk about how you balance your daily cello practice? Do you always do specific warm-up exercises? Do you, for example, start your practice with playing in slow tempo? You get the idea.
Yeah. So this might be, I don't know if it's unorthodox. I guess I just haven't talked to a lot of people at this point, at the point of my career where my fellow colleagues are at. But, well, as a summary, this is what I do basically. I pick up the cello, I tune the cello. I don't need to show you all of that. And then I do just open strings. Um, Maybe because I'm really obsessed with balance in the bow or creating beautiful sounds. Every day, every time I pick up the cello, it's kind of I see my cello as a human being in a sense that, some days you wake up groggy, some days you wake up really happy, and I have to say hello to the cello, and I have to figure out how my cello is responding. The weather affects everything. So for example, today, I think today my cello is telling me that, well, I haven't chosen any gender, but he or she is feeling quite happy, and probably to meet all of you guys. Yeah, for me, that's kind of a big part of my warm-up. Also, coming to a little bit of a practical point is that my time to practice is very limited. So practice a lot. If there are some younger people here who are still in school or just finishing school and you still have the luxury of practicing, get in as much as you can now. But anyway, I also answered some questions on that formula, the document that you sent me, William, about practice techniques. And I say I choose, let's say, difficult passages in the repertoire, and I make an exercise or even a warm-up exercise out of it. I'm trying to think of something off the top of my head. For example, one really good thing for the beginning of the Dvorak. For example, just to get those 16ths in a row, I often do it in dotted rhythm practice, and that's another thing that I think William asked me on the document. Is there a go-to practice technique? And for me, that is dotted practice, because dotted practice, for anyone who doesn't know, is just adding a dot and shortening the next note in a pair, so that you really concentrate on all the different combinations of the two notes. For example, here, I'm practicing the feeling of going from the fa to the sol here, and from here, and then that really changes up every single note change, in fact, every single shift. And it allows me to really kind of clean up all the difficulties in all of the repertoire, in fact. So if I'm starting some new piece and I'm learning something new, after my long strings and kind of maybe slow scales, just to warm up my left fingers, because for me that is where quick warm-ups happen. If I start slow vibrato, and then I progressively get faster with my vibrato oscillations. But after that, I go right now straight into difficult parts of the repertoire. I make maybe a 2-bar exercise of difficult things, and I go straight to it because I have very limited time. I don't know if that helps you, but that's what I do these days with my practice. So yeah, any follow-up questions?
Yeah, we have an earlier question from Cesar asking, I think you might have touched on this, but he's asking, can you speak about the freedom of the right hand and about the thumb of the right hand and its role?
The freedom of the thumb and its role. Yes, well, in fact, it's funny you ask, because for our bow, we talked about the fulcrum, and for me, the thumb is the fulcrum, the balancing point, and the other fingers go around the fulcrum here. You see, bow hold, I've come to learn after all these years, is a very personal thing. There are many different types of bow holds. The thing for me that the common thread for a good freedom in the bow hold is when the little muscles and the joints are able to be supple. No matter what school you come from in terms of, bow holds, somewhere even, I just demonstrated here so many different versions of where the bows go. But as long as there's a supple feeling in the knuckles, and then where the thumb goes, it should kind of be able to do that. That's where the freedom comes from. So for example, I do. So for me, actually, something I also talk a lot in lessons is, I seem to, now that I'm saying it out loud, it seems I always have a point in the middle of the bow that I concentrate on. But after about half of the bow, I always think already of the bow change that's coming. And this is in fact the second half of every bow, whether it's here or here. Mentally, it's already the preparation for the next bow. And that actually already sends the signals in my fingers and my arm to already start passively going in that direction, so that when I do change, there's no sudden manipulation here, but it's actually already ready to go. Our brains are an amazing muscle, and once it starts sending out that signal in the nerves, it already is feeling it, and it can actually support that shock, the change. And I always call it like the the suspension in a car. When you come to a bump, if you have a nice suspension, you won't really feel it as much. And actually, when I change the bow, that's what I do. As I start getting closer to the bump, I would say around here, I already start thinking about the bow change, and then that actually helps me get a smooth bow change. And that's where I find the freedom. And in fact, my bow, to come back again, sorry to do this, but to the idea of balance, if I let the bow stay balanced and let it do its thing, my hand is actually very free. I don't need to manipulate so much here and there how to get a beautiful sound. Once the three axes that I mentioned are chosen appropriately for the musical context, the bow should be let free, more or less. So I hope that maybe gives you maybe an abstract answer of how to find freedom in the bow. But yeah.
Great. We don't have any questions from the audience at the moment, so if you'd like to go on.
I'll continue a little bit, yeah. Another thing that I like to do for self-care, kind of going along with that, is finding a good support system. So I always surround myself with people or objects or activities that give me energy. So personally, I prefer one-on-one coffee dates with friends or colleagues, or even small dinner gatherings with a small group of friends. And because I obviously very much like to cook, I often invite just a few, just have a really nice evening, just also have conversation, because conversation, inspiring ones, ones where you're really not even looking at the time and you're really into the topic, those are the ones that actually get me feeling very balanced as a human being, knowing where I am in the world, hearing from other people's experiences. It kind of grounds you and kind of humbles you sometimes, unexpectedly or expectedly. But I feel that surrounding yourself with the right people is very important in your life. And we're musicians. We're always surrounded by musicians, I would say 99% of the time. But due to my different, facades, the different roles that I play in my life, I have different what I call social ecosystems in which I am part of. For example, I live here in Brussels. Some can say that it's quote unquote the capital of the EU, in the sense that the Commission and the EU Parliament, they're all based here. And I've, just because of who I am, and I'm more curious and I like to go out and meet new people, this expansion of my network has really helped me understand how I and my career, my job, and my responsibility in this world, again, it comes back to self-awareness of who I am. It kind of puts things in perspective when you have people who are doing, who are presidents of different departments, or who are working in, I don't know, different institutions around Brussels. So yeah, of course, on a career level, having a wider network certainly helps when you undertake projects such as the Belgian Cello Society, which is purely not a performance route, so to speak. But just another little tip as you move forward, it's nothing to do with balance, but always just be nice to people. There's no reason to burn bridges. There's no reason that your ego should ever get in the way. Everybody has their side of the story, and that will come back, I'm sure, in a good way at some point in your life. Yeah. Um, and then when we talk about just physical health, keeping balance there, yeah, everybody has different body types and goals. What keeps me motivated is just, I've tried all the things, yoga, jogging, group classes, etc. But for me, I get the most motivation or rush when I just do lightweight training and the HIIT classes. HIIT classes, it's high intensity interval training. Look it up. It's a group type class. You go really strong, and then you have 30 seconds of rest. You sweat a lot, but I find the most health benefits from that personally. And then again, the second aspect of physical health is eating habits. Yes, I've gained a few pounds from the pandemic lockdowns, but in general, I try to eat as clean as possible, whatever that means. And also, I try to not eat too late in the evening, if possible. Of course, sometimes your work goes quite late, and then you have to eat something because you're starving. But going to bed on a full stomach for me is it's a setup for failure for the next day. And recently, what takes me 2-3 minutes at night, and I found really helpful, and it's kind of a personal little pleasure, is maybe I'm sure a lot of you have heard, is overnight oats. So I do that a lot nowadays because at night I just have my little containers of the oats, the chia seeds, the flax seeds, all of the things that create a very good breakfast, healthy, balanced breakfast. Again, balanced, yeah. And you have a lot of flavor combination possibilities, different fruits, different butters that you can put in, nut butters, etc. So that's how I keep balance on a physical health standpoint. And sleep, it's also very important. Well, this being said, until I was, I think, in my 20s, even into the late 20s, I wouldn't sleep until 1 or 2 a.m. minimum because I just had so many things going on. And yes, granted, I think that was a very imbalanced time of my life, but you have to sometimes be imbalanced to understand what you need to do to be balanced, right? So life is always on this little balancing game here. But nowadays, for example, not that I'm too old, thankfully, but for example, after a 9-hour teaching day, I'll come and at 9 or 10 p.m., I'll be so tired, I'll just fall asleep right away. So yeah, just try to make sure you get good sleep, have a good sleep pattern. Of course, sometimes a lot of people are traveling often, so it's hard to have a regular sleep schedule. Travel is also very difficult for your body, but try to find your pattern as much as possible. It comes back to self-care. Yeah, little self-care things. Even for my sleeping schedule, I always have water next to my bed now. I didn't care about this when I was younger. I need my water next to me, chapstick. I always like, for self-care, for example, it sounds really silly, but I like to keep a pair of slippers next to the bed so that when I wake up, I have something nice and cushy to get into. How you start your day really matters, right? So, for example, that's the little things I do for myself. Um, but yeah, those are the different aspects on a kind of a human level of how to keep yourself balanced, and just my personal experience, how I keep myself balanced as a musician and as a career person living through this crazy world today. Um, so yeah, I mean, if anybody has other further questions, feel free to ask William.
We have a follow-up question from Milena.
Yeah.
Thank you for your answer to my question. If there's time to take another question, would you talk about your self-talk with regards to your cello playing and cello career? Do you also, like so many of us, come to have thoughts about not working hard enough, not achieving as much as you'd like? Could you please touch on the topic of simply enjoying the music of other cellists versus listening with judgment in regards to where they are at in terms of ability and musicality?
Oh, that's a very good question. I'll try to touch on the different topics. If I miss something, William, please let me know. Um, I do have to be honest. Um, it is very difficult, yes, to go to, as a professional. I assume you're a professional when you ask such a question, to go to a concert and really turn off your own professional opinion or your experience XYZ, which leads to a certain, I wouldn't say judgment, but your own preferences for live concerts, for example, if you go there. Um, I do find it very difficult, I have to be honest. And I don't really go very often to live concerts because, yeah, I just have a very specific view of certain repertoire, and unless if it's, a group or an artist or, an orchestra that I really enjoy their interpretation of that repertoire, I don't really go out of my way to go hear live concerts. So it is a tricky question. I understand your point. Um, but also, as being the director of the Belgian Cello Society, I do often go to concerts, or I often, not scout, but I look at the various artistries that are out there on today's stages. Um, I have my personal taste, and everybody, of course, has their own personal taste. But being in a position where I am, I want also to make sure that there is visibility and credibility in the different styles of cello playing that exists out there. So, I mean, if you look at the different editions of the Brussels Cello Festival that we've done, you will notice that there are various different types of cellists out in the world whom I appreciate for various different things. One of the great things about the first Brussels Cello Festival, for example, was the opening night in the Église de Sablon here in Brussels. I had programmed the 6 different cellists to do the 6 different suites all in one night, a big marathon, full church, and most people stayed until the end. Also because I think the 6 different cellists who played the different suites in a row were all so very different, and they had also each something very special to say. You and I might say, okay, that is not my cup of tea, but everybody after a certain point has valuable messages that they want to express with their cello playing. Um, so yeah, I think it's important always to be open-minded and be receptive. And actually, that being said, I do sometimes, if I am in a concert, I actually try to turn off my professional side and try to enjoy the what is the right word? The performance that is being presented to me for what it is. But I think now I have veered off a little bit. William, could you remind me some other points that I didn't touch on in my response?
Right. Do you come to have thoughts about maybe not working hard or not achieving as much as you'd like?
Well, yes, as a very ambitious person, and I think it's very clear from all the different projects that I undertake here, I always feel like I'm not doing enough. I told you that I have a very clear time management schedule with my too many calendars and different color codings. I always think that it's not enough. But you also have to realize you can't compare yourself ever also to other people. You have your goals, and someone said this, and I think it totally makes sense. There's enough space in the world for everybody to shine. And for me, yes, sometimes I feel like, oh, I could have done that better. Um, I should have done something differently. But what consoles me is that I've given it my 110% best at everything that I do. So if I know that I gave it my all, that should be what you're going for. And if certain things really succeed, great. If it doesn't, it wasn't meant to be for that moment in time. And I think, if I put that into context of my life, you know, some people might say, if they took, a snapshot of my life right now and they say, wow, he's done this and this and this. But in my head, I'm thinking, wow, I didn't do this and this and this and this. But at the end of the day, you present what you want to the world. You give your best, and hopefully someone will see the beauty in that. Yeah. Anything else, William?
We have another question from Ken. asking, how did the COVID years affect your skills and playing, and do you devote time to composition of original pieces?
Okay, so two parts. During the COVID lockdowns, there was a question in one of your documents, William, and I've already answered it. Um, I really, I really actually, that sounds really bad now, maybe it's too early to say. I really enjoyed the COVID lockdowns in the sense that, let me explain myself, that I didn't feel guilty for not practicing as much as I can and working on the computer 24/7. There were just weeks where I would just say, all right, here's a cello. I have no concert coming up for an indefinite period. I will leave it be. And actually, at that point in my life already, I was thinking about self-care. I was thinking about all of the kind of the health, balancing issues. So for me, it was a guilt-free moment to actually restore myself. I'm sure a lot of maybe the older professionals can relate, but going from concert to concert, engagement to engagement, responsibility to responsibility, it got very tiring for all of us. And for me, that moment was a way to just say, all right, I'm gonna enjoy just time alone with the people that I love, of course, with respect to all of the COVID distancing rules. This being said, I mean, I didn't just dilly dally all day and do nothing. Um, for example, I did make some goals, and I think having small goals with a larger goal in mind is important. Something that I really wanted to do was transcribe some repertoire from violin to cello. Our repertoire is not as wide or varied as pianists, for example. So I mean, the cello. You guys all out there, you understand what I mean. We like to borrow from our friends. I decided I wanted to do the Brahms Opus 78 Violin Sonata for cello. I did manage to do that, and I played it in some concerts after the lockdowns, and that gave me pleasure because it's something that is not that common, and I felt a sense of achievement. And so for myself, I don't speak for all of you, but having little goals, little things, and then rewards after that helps me stay motivated, helps me stay balanced as well. I also did the Clara Schumann Three Romances from violin to cello, absolutely gorgeous pieces. Um, and yeah, so that's how I spent my COVID. I ate a lot. As I said, I gained a few pounds here, but that's not for today. Um, yeah, I, I, I have to say I appreciated the, the moments that COVID lockdowns gave us to kind of decompress a little bit. Anything else?
Nothing from the audience at the moment, but would you like to go into the in the practice room questions? The questions from the document I sent.
Sure.
Great. So the first question is, what is on your music stand right now?
Yes. What is on my music stand? It is something very new to me. It is the Strauss Piano Quartet. And actually, right after the session, I have to start learning it because we have our first rehearsal tomorrow. So my colleagues will be happy that I've put in some good work today.
Great. I guess the next thing is, um, how do you stimulate creativity and imagination in the practice room?
Um, well, a lot of different ways, yeah. You have to always know if it's not a solo cello work. I always try to get the score, try to understand what's going on contextually and how I fit into that. Knowing those textures, knowing the harmonic structures, that always inspires me. Um, Another more practical way to inspire myself is if I know this program that I'm practicing right now is for a certain space, and then it's already confirmed for a certain hall, I try to imagine how I would play it in that hall. If I don't know the acoustics, fine, but just seeing the space, whether it's an image on the computer, I often say that you have to practice like you're performing. Oftentimes what happens is we practice just here, and I practice the synchronization, the bow changes, string crossings, good tone for this room, just for my living room here. And sometimes that's not enough. And what inspires me is the variety and the unknown factors and playing with that in the practice room. That is quite intriguing for me. Yeah.
Great. In your mind, what is it that makes an effective practice session? In terms of hours or quality?
Yeah. So for that question, I had said, and I already touched upon it in the session today. It's really not about the quantity, obviously minute wise, but the quality. And when people have told us when we were younger, 10 minutes of really concentrated practice is equal to 1 hour, or 10 hours of mindless practice. It is very true. And probably some of the younger ones out there might be saying, yeah, he said this, but I am going to do 1 full hour. Yes, you could do 1 full hour of mindful practice and it'll be even better. Yes, 10 times better. But that's something that I always try to keep in mind, and that's how I structure my practice. Simply on a practical level, I don't have enough time in my days to sit for 5 hours in a row and just enjoy learning this Strauss piano quartet or any other repertoire. Yeah. What was the other part of the question?
Actually, yeah, that sort of addresses the question. Another one is, what is your balance between technique and repertoire, and have you seen a change since when you were a student versus now when you're a professional?
Balance of my technique and repertoire.
Repertoire, right? Technique practice and
Ah,
repertoire.
yeah, I certainly would say, yes, this being said, caveat, we always have room to improve, yes. But thankfully, with, very smart time management and learning how to get a lot done in a short period of time, I think I generally have come to the point that hopefully most people at my point in our lives and our career will get there. I've come to a point where I have a certain level of playing that I know I can achieve with a certain amount of minimal amount of practice for a certain difficulty of repertoire. But after that point, it's about being very careful of how you use that time to get to a certain point in your practice or in the next level. Sorry, can you remind me of the question one more time?
Sure. It was, what is your balance between technique
Yeah.
practice and repertoire?
And in terms of the balance between the technique of the repertoire, yeah, I'll probably, if I learn something new, for example, I will look at the difficult sections. I'll know, again, because I'm generally, I think, a very self-aware person, and as a cellist, I know what my limitations are. I know what I'm really good at. So I'll look at the parts and I'll say, I need to practice more this for this section, this. And then once I've put everything together, then I make sure with a certain deadline or goal, by this point, I want to make sure all of these sections have reached this level personally. And if you're very well aware, once you've read through something, you know what time investment it will take to get to a very nice, convincing performance level. Um, yeah, there are certain technical things that I don't feel comfortable with, but if I practice, I'll get there, like everybody. Um, so yeah, that's how I balance my technical and the repertoire. Hopefully, I know myself well enough now to make sure I distribute my time well enough to get there for the concert.
Sure. We have a question from Sarah asking, how do you start after a month of not playing? Or how do you start practicing after a month of a
Oh,
break?
I don't think I've gone a whole month, but I've gone quite long periods, so I think it's similar enough. Um, I don't know how old you are, or what time could she maybe respond to that? Um, but actually, again, even if I take a bit of time off, um, I know, let's say I have another concert coming up. Generally, I'm a very, I guess, goal oriented person. So if I have a repertoire that needs to be done for a certain date, I plan out my practice that way. So if I've taken a month off, for example, how do I get back to it on a very practical point of view? Again, open strings. If I've really taken a whole month off, I would say then I would pretend, I think what I would do is I would pretend that I'm a beginner, a complete beginner, and teach myself how to play cello again. And every now and I think I've also done this in the past. Every now and then I pretend, if I've taken, 2 weeks off, for example, and it has happened, I come back and I pretend I don't know what the cello is. And I pretend I'm my own teacher, and that's what we should always do anyway when we're practicing, and really look at myself objectively and say, okay, bow, all right, contact point, how, try to rediscover everything from like baby's eyes, how, okay, when I do this comes out, and this is how I feel. Just being very aware of how the body reacts to the kind of the new feeling that your fingers might have. Of course, after a month, you might have less calluses and might feel a little bit more electric under your fingers. Enjoy that, actually, and try to find it from a very different vantage point and teach yourself again. Go back to maybe some of the etudes. I would probably say go to specific parts in the repertoire and make exercises and etudes out of the repertoire, but simply because I know I'm always running for time, so there's that. Vibrato, yes, always making sure I find the right way to get a really nice balance on every single finger, trying not to block my hand, because that's kind of the enemy of having a beautiful, open, resonant sound, yeah? Even if it's first and second finger, take the first finger off, and you'll notice immediately how much more full and resonant the second finger vibrato becomes. But yeah, little things like that. That's, I think, how I would approach coming back to the cello. Yeah.
Back to the in the practice room questions, but what are the best ways to prevent injury?
Best ways to prevent injury. Well, always warming up. As I told you, my way is starting everything from very, very slow, kind of slow motion practice. So, I mean, I obviously do the open strings. I also, if I can, I try to, take a nice warm shower. That's an immediate, obviously, muscle relaxer. Of course, I can't take a warm shower before every single practice session, but I try, if I do have morning sessions, so I practice, I take a shower, a hot shower, and then I come straight to the cello. I try all the different vibratos, the different bow strings, different contact points to find what the maximum and minimum of my cello is that day. Because as I told you, cello is kind of like your best friend. You have to have a conversation and a relationship with it every day. It's different. So finding where that is, and then with those parameters of my cello, finding what I can do to have the best practice session. And then physically, more related to how to avoid injury. Yeah, just making sure I never go straight into a practice session without any warm up. And I also say this sometimes to my students. For example, I mean, this is not to avoid injury, but when if you have an orchestra audition, for example, and you have to play the opening of the Haydn in D and maybe 2 excerpts or whatever it is that you do here for those excerpts, I say if you had run from the train station and you get into the hall and you're the second person that morning at 9:08 or whatever it is, then make sure you find in a quiet way your own way to warm up every single part of your body. So quietly, I do this. I make sure every single finger, within a very truncated amount of time, each finger has found its balance. It's alive again, so that all the nerve endings of my fingers are quite active. I try to also, it's kind of like what they do in meditation. They say go from, the top of your head, think about your eyes, relax your eyes, their ears, the nose, the cheeks. It's the same issue, but I do it in a very quick way. So I do the fingers here, wrist, then I feel the nice balance on my shoulders. Then with the bow, same issue. I go from tip all the way up until then I get to the bigger muscles of the body, the core, the butt, and then the feet, and especially the neck. I just never ever, even if I have to take 2 minutes out before, if I run into a rehearsal with colleagues, I say I need 2 minutes. 2 minutes, I just do very bizarre sounds to find the most optimal cellistic balance, and then I go. I never just rush in and say, okay, let's go, and I start doing, the beginning of, I don't know, let's say the Strauss piano quartet. I would never do that, So avoid it by always getting yourself very warmed up, and your body will tell you when it's not warmed up enough. And if it's not, then don't force your body to do something beyond its capacity. So yeah.
What are some habits, mental and physical, you cultivate in the practice room that makes you a more confident performer?
What are the mental? Sorry.
What are the mental and physical habits that you cultivate in the practice room that makes you a more confident performer?
Um, this goes back again to the issue of actually always practicing as if I'm performing. So of course, there are moments when I'm learning something new or really bringing back something difficult. I might sit and just really do kind of in a scientific way, just understanding the physics of my body. But I always practice as if I'm performing it. That's my way, really. Um, yeah.
Great. And one last question is, how has your practicing evolved over the years or even recently? And is there anything that has surprised you?
Anything that has surprised me? Um, the evolution of my practice is really refining what I've said earlier, which is quality over quantity. Um, Sometimes, when I was younger, I think I would just sit there. I would have a whole day. I was in school and I finished all my studies or whatever, and I would just have a whole day of just working on different of a Bach suites, a movement of a concerto, a movement of a sonata. I would really work for the next lesson. Those are the good old times, I would say. Um, but now I really focus on getting small little goals for myself in the session and making sure I achieve the small ones. But always, the important thing here is as I have the small goals achieved, I always look at the overall goal. What do I want this to be a part of? And understanding what that small goal will mean for me on that day. It could be a small little victory. It could also be a very difficult passage, and then you might not have achieved where you wanted it to be. But then that's just another lesson for tomorrow as you come back to it. So for me, having little goals and always having a bigger vision of where you want to go at the same time, that's really important. That's how my practice has evolved. Yeah.
Great. So I think that marks the end of the questions, and if you
Good.
can give any closing remarks, that would be great.
Oh, closing remarks. Well, I hope this was helpful for anyone who is listening. Yeah, if you have other questions, please let me know. But, we live in a world where nowadays to make your own life meaningful, it might not just look like going from concert to concert. This being said, I have many friends who are purely freelancing musicians and they enjoy their life just always immersed in rehearsals to rehearsal to concert, and it exists. But there is also a big, wide world out there, and I find more fulfillment when I know my place, where I am in the world, how I relate to the people in my surroundings, how they inspire me. Um, so yeah, just being well aware and keeping a good, healthy, balanced head on your head, I think that's really important. So I hope that helps some of you out there. If you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out and ask how I do certain things directly. But yeah, thanks a lot.